And 13th, 14th, 15th was, we talked about in 8th grade.
Okay, so when you have freedom of
13,
speech,
14, 15.
what amendments do you think of?
Hey, all right, so it is September the 9th for our dual credit class, and we are going on in our slides, and right now we're talking about a time for reform and changes to the Constitution. So last time we talked about the 16th, 17th, and 18th amendments, and now we're picking up with the 19th, which is another change that goes on in the progressive era. So this grants women the right to vote. Makes sense. Half the population, if you're expanding democracy, why not give half the population the right to vote? Sounds like an expansive movement to me. The movement for women's right to vote had been a national issue for years, and it had been even before the Civil War. The suffrage women's suffrage movement used to be hand in hand with the emancipation movement to get rid of slavery before the Civil War. However, the Civil War was such a big deal; these things kind of went underground for a while because people were dying, and afterwards, the women's rights movement divorced itself from the ending slavery movement because Black males got the right to vote, but just men. And so they felt that this was an act of betrayal. It felt like they were being misrepresented in a sense. They thought it was unfair since they saw themselves as citizens before the war even began. So you're going to see a separation between those two movements. Leaders such as Susan B. Anthony, Cady Stanton, and Alice Paul signified the leadership of this movement. Okay. Some of these folks, like I said before, a lot of times these reform movements start overseas and they come here. So the women's suffrage movement first takes off in England before it really hits the pavement here in America. And in England, it was often very violent. So you would have women assaulting police officers and politicians and stuff like that. You would have, of course, them getting clubbed by the police and stuff. It was really violent. But a lot of the suffragettes would learn how to organize over in Britain, and then they brought it here to America. Now, whenever they were marching for the right to vote, like say in Washington, or if they were like publishing papers to try to convince people to do this, sometimes these leaders would, like I think Alice Paul, they're going to put her in a nut house for it. And they're like, what do you mean women should have the right to vote? You must be crazy. So they put her in a nut house, and they even shove like feeding tubes down her throat to like feed her mush. And it's supposed to be very painful.
What the heck?
Yeah, so she's like stuck in a nut house, a cold nut house, all by yourself in isolation with a feeding tube. And so a lot of times when they would do marches, they were beaten in the streets, stuff like that. Yeah. So it was a pretty rough thing, right? It was a pretty rough thing.
Let's have one of those female bodybuilders from today's world go back to then.
Well, they didn't have all those drugs back then. So
I get it, Mr. White. That was funny.
So, it's true. They didn't. As far as I know, the first people who started like abusing testosterone was like the Germans, like the Nazis.
Oh, yeah, in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
That does not surprise me.
Yep. All right. So groups such as Working Women's Central Association and the National Women's Party organized women's marches, petitions, and protests in order to bring about national support and awareness. The 19th Amendment was ratified into constitutional law in 1920 during the Wilson administration. We'll talk about him more later, despite its initial opposition. So it was very unpopular at first, but I mean, it did meet with some violence and stuff like that, but that doesn't signify everyone, because if it's ratified by the nation, that essentially means the majority of men thought women should have the right to vote. So there you have it. So 1920, yep, been a little over 100 years now.
Remember when you used to drink Dr. Pepper every single day?
Oh yeah, Diet Dr Pepper. Yeah, I haven't drank like a real soda in years.
Okay, so we went to the governor's office and I think it was the governor. Who was the, it was like the senator or something.
Senator
Representative. It was the representative, no,
Gomer.
Louis Gohmert.
Yeah.
Yeah, went to his office in DC, right?
Okay.
He had stacks on stacks of Dr. Pepper.
Because
Oh,
he's
yeah.
he's Texan. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
supposed to.
and he like had his fridge full of Dr. Pepper, stacks of Dr. Pepper. We went and met with him. It was really cool. He also had like every East Texas flag, or like every high school and every college
Oh, okay.
flag in his office. He also had he gets sponsored by you know the little crunchy, they're like the peanut butter crunchy bars.
The
They're like
local made
Reese's.
ones,
Yeah, local
like the
made
ones you get like at Halloween and then you eat last.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
you get Chica sticks.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love those.
He
Okay.
gets sponsored by them.
They're made in
And so he
Lufkin,
has
which is
he
where
has
my
almond M&Ms
my
because he
grandmother
loves
lives,
almond
and
M&Ms.
so I
And he
eat
has
them
Chico
all the
sticks.
time.
I would eat those last. I get those are like the little peanut
I
butter
love-
things that are
What the heck
So
is
he has
black
an
and
entire
orange.
thing of Chico sticks and an entire thing of almond M&Ms. And I
They're
love
made
those.
in Lufkin.
Oh, that's
Wait,
awesome.
it's Chico sticks and one of those ones that are like zebra striped. The ones that have
The wafers?
They're
I
like
don't
the
know.
exact same thing. They taste the same, but
It's
they
really
look
cool.
different.
Also,
I know what I'm talking
we got
about.
Little
taken
wafer
from that
things.
building
Yeah.
through the underground
Wait, did
tunnels
he give
into
you
the Capitol
candy?
building.
Well,
No,
Whoa.
the ones that the whatever they are, the ones that they used, we got because we had him with us.
Yeah.
We just like walked to the Capitol building in those tunnels.
Interesting.
It was super
So
cool.
for a few moments, you were nuke proof.
Yeah,
wow.
through tunnels under DC.
So, when did you go?
I went like last summer.
With,
No, not last
That
summer.
was the
Does
summer
this
before
one-
last summer.
does this
Yeah.
school do field trips in like?
We
Normally.
normally we would be doing one this year, but
where
I don't
you
know.
go?
I don't know. If
I
we
know.
do it.
I
We're
was
gonna-
gonna
Yeah.
have it
We
now.
do
Only
a
DC?
DC. Well,
Yeah,
I don't
'cause-
Don't
think
go
we
to
might-
New York?
Well, the plan was
We were
was
gonna
to
go
do
this
NASA
year.
every other year. So because it's
if you're
expensive.
not upperclassmen, you get to go to DC and New York. If you're
Our
not,
school, if you were in high school, you could go to New York, but they did it every other year. And so this
Yeah.
year we would get to go again.
this year we would get to go again to DC.
Yeah.
And this year we would have gotten to
But
go to
DC was
DC
the
and
eighth
it's been
grade
like,
trip, San Antonio was the seventh grade trip.
yeah, we would have gotten to
Okay.
stay a night in New York.
Only a night? We stayed like a
Well,
week.
we go to DC for the week and then we stay a night in New
Oh,
York.
that's really
Interesting.
But
We'll have to see how things go.
I don't know if it's gonna go on this year.
I don't think it will.
I don't think it will. either.
Yeah. I personally don't like overnight field trips because
Dude, we stayed like.
I like to stay in my own bed.
So fun. Extra.
I love hotel bed.
Yeah,
I
we
have
got-
hotel bed.
We stayed in this 5-star hotel. Dude,
Mhm.
it was so nice. They had like cucumber and like fruit water on every floor. They had escalators and glass elevators going all the way up. It was super awesome.
Nice.
interesting. But in any case, what do we see up here?
Colored water
Segregation.
Yeah, this is like a typical. Yeah, so you see on one side it says one for white, one for colored on both sides. That's the restrooms, and here you have the same thing with like the drinking. Like for black people.
Color red.
No, not color. No, not colo red. Ha ha ha. ha. Now,
Hey, at least the bathrooms were the same.
well,
White men and colored men.
I would assume it would separate once you get past.
Oh, that's nice.
So like you'd have different drinking fountains often in restaurants. Like people would have to go to the back and get their food to go. Couldn't sit in. Of course, they had places on buses and trains they were supposed to sit to separate them. Because if you remember, and we read about this, the Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, where you have the idea of separate but equal. So, oops, wrong computer. Which you got to be careful because if you watch the news, you might find that some people are asking for something like that to come back.
Oh, yeah.
So be careful. All right. So though many calls for reform were being voiced across the nation, the rights for African Americans continue to decline. And it's true. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, you see a continual decline until things kind of plateau and kind of move along till the Civil Rights Movement. Jim Crow laws still enforced racial segregation through much of the South. These laws encompass everything from the ownership of property, poll taxes, transportation, public facilities, gun control, and literacy test. The main point of these laws were to stifle American voting and empower the Southern Democratic Party to maintain the status quo. So it's political power through racism. That's essentially it. It's a continuation. In some ways, it's trying to continue the old antebellum South power structure into the modern world, where you had, well, I mean, it didn't work, but it crossed so many generations. It became something that a lot of people thought was ingrained in the culture forever. So if you go to many parts of the world today, including much of South America, you might still see things like this. Like if you go to Brazil, a lot of the native Brazilians or the darker skinned Brazilians might have parts of town where they're supposed to live in and stuff like that. And they're segregated out and stuff like that. Not always by law, but sometimes by kind of like how it was in the North back in the day. And it still is in a lot of places. I mean, people often live with people who remind them of themselves. That's like a normal thing. People often live, I mean, it's apparent in every town. The reasons behind that can be many, but it's one of those things people often do. You see that across
Jim Crow laws aren't still in.
No. But you see, there are some laws that came into place back then that have stayed on. Like the first gun control laws were essentially to keep firearms out of poor Black people's hands, right? So, but those are going to build up from then on out. Let me see. Some things like property laws, that's actually going to transfer to other areas. It's going to like transfer into the cities and the suburbs in the West and the North later. We'll see too.
My sisters won't even like come to my family's house that I live in now with my parents and my mother because we have guns in the house.
What?
They literally will not even come for Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays or anything.
I'm sorry.
They crazy.
Well, that's
Because
their
you have guns
decisions, I guess.
Yes, we have guns and then we have an American flag in the front lawn.
and they don't like you.
American.
Well-
American.
No, like an American flag, not like a Confederate flag.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
They're very leftist.
Well,
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Indicated.
that's called being an extremist.
It's pretty unfortunate that people are getting so polarized that they don't talk sometimes,
Yeah,
and it
like,
divides family. That's
when-
sad.
When I first got my license over the summer, the protests were happening, and I was driving downtown, and I got stopped at a stoplight,
Hmm.
and I was like, "There's no way this is happening." And protesters started like surrounding my car, and then all the other cars around.
And Tyler?
In Tyler.
Oh yeah. They
So
did
it's
do
right
that for a couple
downtown,
weeks.
did
Yeah.
that. And it was like, and my sisters were like, "That's what you deserve," because they just had a feeling that you were not for what we want. And I was like, okay.
That's melting my brain just hearing.
I know,
it.
no, they're-
No, my brain
No, she
doesn't
literally
comprehend.
They had a feeling because they knew that
They
you
knew you were
are
bad.
against us. And I was like,
Well,
Oh my god.
what?
Well,
Just the whole week.
that is an entire.
That's the whole reason there's so many problems.
Yeah. I'm like,
well,
I have a feeling that is.
The extremists on both sides are usually wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, let's hope people settle down. I mean, it's honestly, the last several elections have been so dramatic that
Oh, yeah.
people have been getting kind of like, and then it calms down for a while. So let's hope that this one does too. Now, I mean, there have been countries where everything has been cool, and then everything becomes very upside down. But let's just hope things stay cool.
Let's just make it so we don't have any more elections.
Okay. All right.
Whoa.
King Joseph from here on out. We'll just hook you up to machines to keep you going. All right. King
Would you
Joseph.
like,
Would you
darn it, who was that?
would you like to live forever?
All right, you ready to move on? So we see changes out everywhere. Uh-oh. We see more things that aren't terribly too happy. What does this have to do with?
Worse than.
There was my teacher. My teacher had an experience with the KKK.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Who?
He said he barely escaped them. Well, because my teacher from church,
Oh, man.
he like saw them in the street and like they had this fire thing,
Yeah.
torches, and like they were gonna chase him, but like he drove off in his car.
Dang. Yeah, I remember the thing is like in Texas during this time period, you couldn't hold political office even as like a mailman without being a member of the Klan. And it was a big thing for a very long time. So a lot of people were like who wanted to move up in society. It was
No, it's the KK.
yeah, I don't think yeah, that's the thing. I don't know if the person who made this political cartoon probably knew what it was, but yeah, so
No, you can.
I don't even understand.
you might see him as what is his armpit? Is it an armpit
It
K?
looks like another K, almost.
It might be.
Understand what this is saying.
So what they're saying here,
K on the-
the lost cause is kind of like a romanticized idea that the
What is that
Confederacy
family underneath their arms?
that the Confederacy can live on.
That's a baby.
Yeah, so you see this family, they're trying to hide
Is that
away,
a man that's like
hanging from a tree there, yeah, because of
They used to hang.
lynching. And you see a burned schoolhouse. They're huddled under fear under this death. It says worse than slavery. So,
Wait, what were they saying on the translator? KKK?
well, yeah, they're talking about the terrorism
Government.
Oh.
because to use violence for political gain, like to hold down a people because of the way they're born, that's terrorism, right? I mean, that's what we call it today. So, a time for reform and changes the Constitution. So, Jim Crow laws were enforced not only by the local and state governments, but they were secretly enforced through acts of violence, murder, intimidation, and rape by the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan formed in 1860 by ex-Confederate soldiers who opposed Reconstruction, weakened by President Grant's crackdown. So what that means is like during Reconstruction, President Grant, who won the Civil War as general, he's going to use the U.S. Army to help kind of wipe them out. So it started off as kind of like a drinking club for Confederate veterans. And then you're going to have one guy who's a very effective Confederate leader, William Bedford Forrest, is going to organize them into kind of like this club. And they're going to do a lot of violence and stuff like that, especially on people who are Republicans who come down to represent the federal government at the time, or people who were teachers, people who were offering aid to ex-slaves, and of course, slaves themselves. But it's going to have a rebirth later after virtually being wiped out in the 19-teens. The Klan is revived, inspired by nostalgic lost cause doctrine. So,
Ku
after-
Klux Klan.
yeah, I forgot where the name came from, but yeah. So I think it's supposed to be like some play on Greek or something like that, because they don't use C's, they use K's.
Because the CCC doesn't sound. CCC sale?
Yeah. So the CCC Cell Clan, no.
She sells these sells by the seashore.
If I remember right, the lost cause idea kind of comes from
It doesn't mean anything in English. The name Ku Klux Klan is a distortion of Greek words.
yeah. See, if that has something to do with Greek. So the lost cause comes from the idea from Jefferson Davis had this idea where there was a noble thing behind the idea of the Confederacy, where it was fighting only for states' rights, and slavery didn't have anything to do with it. And that even though they lost, it was kind of like this romantic, heroic thing where you had these people come together. And so And that's not to disparage everyone who fought in it, because it's true that a lot of people did not fight in it for slavery, but the political reasons for the people who organized it, the politicians, yes, it came back to slavery most of the time. Now, for the little guy who was the soldier in the Confederacy, it was something more. It was something smaller than that. It was because they wanted adventure, or they felt like they were defending their state from an invasion, things like that. Things that are more understandable. So this work here, works such as the silent movie The Birth of a Nation, which was actually the first movie played in the White House for Woodrow Wilson, would kind of spread this idea that you had, there was a belief that Black people were corrupt and unable to be civilized, and only people such as the Ku Klux Klan could protect families from them, things like that.
So why was that played in the White House?
Well, Woodrow Wilson was okay. So Woodrow Wilson was kind of an accidental Democrat president at the time, and the Democratic Party was very, very connected with the Ku Klux Klan, and so
Why? What?
because the Democrat Party was this party of the South during the Civil War,
They infiltrated.
and so it was the party of slavery, and so it was later the party of Jim Crow. So then it was also so they were all connected back then, and they're going to be connected all the way up at least until the 70s with the Klan. So
What?
you're going to have members of our federal legislature of Congress who are going to be Klan members and stuff like that all the way in the 70s
Wait,
in the Democrat Party. Not all of them, but some of them still by then.
People
Yeah.
in the 70s.
Yeah.
Were congressmen.
Yeah.
Were part
Wait,
of
like
KKK.
1970s?
Yeah, this was the thing. Like during the
Wait,
Civil
like-
Rights Movement and all that stuff. Yeah.
Not like a president, right?
No, not president. No, there's never been a Ku Klux Klan president.
It
No.
was.
No.
We probably know.
Yeah, I mean, but the Democratic Party, even the northern ones, had to at least kind of just they didn't like it. They had an uneasy relationship with it, but they couldn't just outright call them out and denounce them because it would cost them their political clout. So they will target African Americans, Catholics, Jews, and foreigners in general, successfully infiltrate the Democratic Party in the South. So it's like here in Texas, right, East Texas, to hold any political office, you had to be a member of the Klan, and the only way to get in office was to be a Democrat, because Republicans were seen as the party of the North, even after the Civil War. It's going to be a long time till that changes, until you have a lot of this stuff kind of slaved away, right? But I mean, it's
Did you
one of
have
those
to be
things
Democrat to run.
in Texas
Wow.
because
If you pretend to be Democrat.
especially after the Civil War, the children and the grandchildren of Civil War veterans would not allow that kind of flipping or discussion, right? I mean, things were still very, very defensive.
What time is it?
My clock. Can't you read an analog clock?
No,
What does that
I
say?
mean, like, I can read what time it is. What time did you get out of this class?
We get out of this class according to that 2:25, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably gonna eat my lunch before you get out of here while I still have a chance.
Okay,
So,
well, I'm
yeah.
a lead in like 13:50.
Okay. Hey, let's move on to the next one.
Wait,
Okay,
I'm on
but-
the last one. I'm sorry.
it's fine. So we will talk about the flip later on when we talk about the end of the Cold War, when the South becomes more Republican and then the North becomes Democrat. It's
Ironic.
weird because, well, at the same time, you're going to have both political parties are going to completely divorce themselves from things like the KKK. So like right now, the modern KKK is basically some trailer trash guys who go out, they drink in the woods, and
True.
they don't do anything. They just kind of say bad things to each other, right? So, I mean, sure, there might I don't remember seeing a case in the news of actual Klan members doing something newsworthy in a long time. Yes, there
They're
is.
like they like hide in trees in like right while you leave Lindale,
Mhm.
and like what's after Lindale?
Mineola?
Maybe it's the other way. Maybe Longview.
No, I have heard once you go towards the
Yeah, that's
Nacogdoches
what I was
area.
trying to think of Nacogdoches, but I didn't know what connected Nacogdoches to. So
Yeah.
like
I think they're
know
around there
they
still.
were really heavy in Lufkin a long,
Mhm.
long time ago.
Yeah.
But like in Nacogdoches still,
Yeah, I've heard they're still around there.
they be chilling. I'm just like,
I haven't.
but
I don't know. I grew up around this area my whole life, and I've never met anybody who was. I'm not saying it wasn't around.
so I've met
But-
people who know people who are in the KKK.
Well, yeah, and like back in the day, like that's one of the things I'm proud of my grandfather of. Like somebody asked him to join, and he said, "No, you're stupid," right? And so I know back then there was, but that was like in the '60s, right? So
Yeah.
a long time ago.
I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I'm
Okay.
not Mason, so I can say it.
No, wait, dude, can we just? Don't you-
Yeah. I can like look at the slide.
Don't run out someone's identity.
Okay. So you, Joseph's secretly a Freemason.
Don't do it.
What's that?
Well, see, that's one big.
It's an old secret society.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing about like American Masons have never done anything like this, like not even remotely related to this.
Yeah,
You can say that.
They're good.
Well, we don't know if they're good or not unless you've been in the Masons, but.
McKenna Mason.
No. They're
It's
Well, I mean,
McKenna.
there's been some checkered history in like Mexican history, right? But like with religious persecution and stuff. But
I'm gonna go with Miss What's Her Face to see if
I don't know. There's a lot of Miss What's Her Faces.
Johnson, the one that told me that she
I'm
wanted to help
I'm
her.
gonna tell her, Miss Johnson. Guess what? Logan
You're
just
in
called you.
The
right.
thing too, where you gonna go? Or no, you want?
I need to go.
We need to go to Miss Johnson.
Where I'm at?
She told us like at the last half of class. Okay. I mean,
Okay. Well,
Am I allowed to go?
you're allowed to go, but we're gonna do one more slide with the ones who are here. So, boop. Okay. Hey, what do we have here?
Children,
Children doing what?
labor.
You might be surprised. This is actually a school.
Ah!
Yeah, they're learning how to weave. So
Oh, I
it's
see the guy over there.
yeah. So yeah. So instead of like children working for pennies, you start having. Remember, I told you this is a time where people are pushing for education of children, and yeah, it's kind of like by a lot of modern standards. They're learning things that are a little
Children
old fashioned.
should be dress coded.
Maybe that is the dress code back then. All right, so faces of reform. This last one we're going to do today. So you have figures such as Jane Addams. She's going to lead the founding of the Whole House in Chicago. Whole House is a bigger organization now. Like, for example, like there's a Whole House in the facilities of the Veteran Hospital in Dallas. And what they do is they give a place for veterans to stay while they're going through long-term treatment. Good, right? But it started out as a way to help immigrant children and girls and women to learn with job skills and education in order to become productive U.S. citizens. They're like, hey, here's how you can speak English. Here's how you can write. Here's some things that you can do so that, you don't have to starve or beg or something else, do crime. So that was good. It was a nice, well-meaning thing. Upton Sinclair, so socialist author who wrote the fiction novel The Jungle, where a meatpacking plant was exposed for its inhumane working conditions. So during this time period, socialism was one of those things that hasn't really been tried out yet, but it had been long
Plan. Awaiting.
kind of, yeah. Like, so you would have people who would say, wow, wouldn't it just be great? And this is not a new thing. People have had ever since like the 1700s, as far as back as I can think, in France, where you have people who are pushing and dreaming up different kinds of socialist societies. And so Upton Sinclair is one of those guys. And socialists usually, one of their big things is they push for the rights of workers.
Wow, wouldn't it just be nice to have no freedom? And
Well, that's not what they were thinking. You got to remember, whenever you have an ideology that's untested,
they don't
you think about the
understand.
positives. Yeah. And
Well,
people who are into socialism often, they're real good about idealism, right? Real good about
what do they
it's.
think the good is? Because when I hear socialism, I think you only get this and this and this, and
Mhm.
that and that and that, and you can't have this or that, and you only like what I like.
Yeah.
So,
Well, a lot of the times, like if you think about like Marxist ideology, it's based almost entirely on economics, where you're thinking about you have certain needs, and if we fulfill those needs, your life is good enough.
like whenever like socialism is talked about, I always think like that they're gonna give us like a certain amount of money,
Mhm.
and then we can only use that, and the government gets to decide what medicine we take and
Yeah.
what we eat. And so like if I wanted white bread, no, you get this 1 penny
Yeah.
worth bread, and you get 2 eggs instead of a dozen. You
Yeah.
have to make it work.
That's how it works out. I mean, there's not a lot of anything, and there's not a lot of variety in socialist countries. So, yeah,
And
you'll
not
see that a
everyone
lot.
can have whatever they want.
And it's controlled from top up.
Yeah.
And whenever the market's not controlling things, you get rid of diversity.
And so like wouldn't the people in government get paid a crap ton more if we like all watched what we got and then they get more taxes and more pay?
They can,
Is
but
that why most people want to do?
they
Not
can.
most.
Everybody thinks they're going to win in a new system. Usually, how it works though is that, usually nobody wins. Everyone's equal in that they're starving together. But
Haven't they seen the Hunger Games?
But the thing is, though, and like you look at like the USSR, it's not that the people who are in the government are winning; it's the people at the very top of the government are the
Yeah,
ones
that's what
winning.
I was trying to say.
That and the mafia. But yeah, I mean, because you always have like people who are willing to illegally provide things, and so usually
some
organized
reason
crime
that
does
like
well.
that person who wants socialism. So like say if he did, like
Okay.
no reason at all. But like if he did do socialism, would he get paid like way more than
If who
he's
did?
Trump.
Trump.
Like the president.
Well, yeah, usually because like you look at places like Venezuela, right? Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries in South America. They were doing pretty good. They had a growing middle class. They had good industries building up. They went socialist, and all of a sudden, their poverty went to the roof. They started running out of pets because they were eating them all. It got that bad. And now, however, even though Venezuela has been largely depopulated, the people who could get out got out. And now they are illegal immigrants in South America looking for the lowest wages they can get. The people who stuck around are extremely poor, some of the poorest people in the world right now. But the people at top are literally some of the richest human beings on earth at this moment. So yeah, I mean, all the wealth goes up. Yeah, go ahead. So it's pretty tough. All right, last bullet. Public influenced heavily by the jungle. This book leading to the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act, along with Meat Inspection Act. With these laws in place, the federal government placed standards on many consumer items. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more when we talk about Teddy Roosevelt, because he's going to be really big into progressive reforms. And so, I don't know. I don't like eating rotten meat or thinking that I'm going to take cold medicine and instead it kind of puts me in a coma until I seize to death. I like that. But that's going to end our lecture today, kids. And we'll pick back up more with this later.